Go on.
And so we come to our top #1 tale, Sleeping Beauty. Let's finish with a gentle, heartwarming story, shall we? A story of evil overcome by a dashing prince who wakes an enchanted maiden with a kiss. So that's what happens in Sleeping Beauty, isn't it? No. Not in the version told by the Italian, dating from 1636. Forget all that romantic stuff, especially where the prince is concerned. Sleeping Beauty, you must sleep at all after this one. This is a tale that's as nasty as all the rest. So nasty that I think I'll tell it myself. Once upon a time, while you were asleep, there lived in this very ruined castle where we're sitting now, a king and a queen. The castle wasn't ruined then, of course. It was a joyful place full of light, and especially then their Majesty's dear little daughter was born. They named her Talia. Now, being anxious about what the future held for their daughter, the king and queen summoned all the wise men in the land to the palace and asked them to predict what would happen to Talia in the years to come. And the wise men all foresaw that Talia would die through being pricked by a splinter while spinning flax. Is it any wonder, then, that their Majesties at once banned spinning wheels and everything of that kind from the palace, and it was all to no avail? One day, years later, exploring on her own, Talia went to a room at the very top of the highest tower of the palace. There she found an old woman. She hadn't heard of any proclamation, and was busy working at a spinning wheel. Fascinated, Talia asked if she could try it for herself. Straight away a splinter pierced her skin beneath her fingernail and she fell down dead. Quite dead. Come with me. There, you see this little room? It was here that Talia's grief-stricken parents laid her out in a bed of velvet before abandoning their palace to the weeds and brambles. The years passed, and then one day a king from a distant land rode by. He'd been hunting, and his falcon had flown into the palace. When he didn't return, he followed, and discovered Talia. Now this, I'm afraid, is where the story begins to get a little, how shall I put it, seedy. This was not one of your more polite and chivalrous kings. As he saw Talia, he was at once captivated by her beauty. Nothing wrong with that. He tried to wake her up. Nothing wrong with that either. But climb into bed with her, then gallop off home to his own queen, because he was already married. Hardly the act of a gentleman, but I'm sorry to say, that's exactly what happened. 9 months later, Talia gave birth to twins. Double trouble, you might think, but no. It was one of these little darlings who revived their mother. Mighty hungry, it sucked her finger, and out came the splinter. Talia woke up. Not so long later, that ungentlemanly king rode by once more. Was he ashamed of what he'd done? Not a bit of it. He freely admitted to Talia what had gone on, and offered to support her and the twins. They named the children Sun and Moon, and they all moved to the king's palace, and into the clutches of the king's mother, the twins' grandmother. Talia may have forgiven the king for what he did, but his mother definitely hadn't, and to prove it she was cooking up a punishment for all concerned, and I do mean cooking. When Sun and Moon arrived at the palace, she took them into her care. In no time at all they were on their way to the kitchen to meet the chef, and dear grandmother's instructions were quite clear. The chef was to slit the children's throats, slice the flesh from their bones, feed it through the mincer, add spices, herbs and the like to the taste, cook thoroughly, stirring well, and finally feed the whole lot to her son, the king. Dinner time that evening found grandmother in a cheerful mood. "Eat tot up," she cackled when the dish was placed before the king. "It is your own." So the king polished it off, smacked his lips, and asked for seconds. Only then did his wicked mother explain what she'd meant about it being his own, as he'd just eaten his own children. The king rushed off, and only then, to his great relief, did he discover the truth. He hadn't eaten his children after all. Fortunately for Sun and Moon, the chef's heart had been kinder than grandmother's. Unable to bring himself to butcher the twins, he'd made the dish from a couple of lambs instead. In no time at all, however, grandmother found out the truth herself. Spitting with fury, she set off to finish the job. Talia was captured. Was she destined to be cooked as well? After a fashion. Grandmother's orders for her were that she should be burned alive, saved from a poison splinter, only to end up tied to a well-done steak. There was only one thing Talia could do, she decided. Put things off for as long as possible in the hope that help would come. "I must undress first," she said. "Very well," agreed grandmother. "After all, there's no point in ruining a fine set of clothes. The gold and pearl embroidery on that gown you're wearing is worth something, even if you're not." And so Talia began one of the few fairy tale striptease acts ever devised. She slowly took off her gown, but no help came. She slowly took off her skirt. Still there was no sign of help. She took off her blouse, slowly of course. Still there was no sign of help, and Talia was starting to feel a bit helpless. She started to take off her petticoat, when help arrived. Into the room rushed the king to save her. They all lived happily ever after, you think? Yes, they did, but not straight away. Wicked grandmother was still plotting, waiting for another day, a day when her son the king was away on business. Finally the day arrived, and at once she set about executing her plan. What was it? To have an execution, of course. She had a huge tub brought into the courtyard of the palace, and filled to the brim with wriggling, jiggling, poisonous snakes. Talia, Sun and Moon, the chef who disobeyed her orders, and his family, for good measure, were all herded in with their hands tied behind their backs. But just as they were about to be tossed into the tub, back came the king to save the day once again. This was simply too much for the evil grandmother. With a cry of anguish, she dived into the tub herself and was eaten alive by the snakes. Then they all lived happily ever after.
Wow. That's messed up.
How would you like to end, Lou?
I think this proves that fairy tales are rather twisted.
Yes. Here, here.
Thank you.